9 episodes ago, we opened this season with the 6 weeks an attacker spent inside Kestrel Health's network, and we named exactly how they got in. Technique T1078, a valid account, obtained through Technique T1556, phishing, a contractor's credential, harvested 3 weeks before anyone touched a production system. No exploit, no malware, just a login page that looked real enough, and a person who typed a real password into it. Kestrel had multi-factor authentication in place at the time. It didn't matter, because the specific kind of multi-factor authentication Kestrel had deployed, a one-time code generated by an app or sent by text message, can be phished exactly as easily as the password sitting next to it. This episode is about the authentication architecture that actually closes that gap, not by making people more careful, but by making the phishing page structurally incapable of completing the login at all. It's worth being precise about why traditional multi-factor authentication doesn't close this hole. Because we have MFA is exactly the sentence that gives most organizations false confidence. A TOTP code, the 6 digits an authenticator app generates every 30 seconds, and an SMS one-time code both work the same way at the protocol level. A secret gets turned into a short string of digits, and a human being reads that string and types it somewhere. The security of the entire scheme depends on that human typing it into the correct place. A phishing kit sitting between the victim and the real site, an adversary in the middle proxy, cheaply available as commodity tooling today, simply relays everything the victim types, password and one-time code both, straight through to the real login page in real time and captures the resulting authenticated session for itself. The victim sees a normal-looking login. The real site sees a normal-looking, fully correct login, code and all. Nothing in that exchange ever asked the one question that would have stopped it. Is the page this code is being typed into actually the page it claims to be? SMS carries an additional, separate weakness worth naming: SIM swapping, where an attacker convinces a carrier to move a victim's phone number onto a device the attacker controls, intercepting the code without any phishing page at all. Kestrel's Contractor had exactly this kind of MFA in place. It raised the bar for the attacker by roughly nothing because the protocol itself has no concept of which site is asking. WebAuthn, the Web Authentication API, is a W3C standard built jointly with the FIDO Alliance, and it solves this as an architecture decision, not a user experience one. FIDO2 is the umbrella term for the full system, WebAuthn, which defines how a browser or app talks to a server, paired with CTAP, the client-to-authenticator protocol, which defines how that browser talks to the physical or built-in device actually holding the credential. Underneath both sits ordinary public key cryptography, applied in a way that removes the one ingredient every phishable scheme up to now has depended on: a shared secret that travels between the user and the server. Here's the actual mechanism. When a user enrolls, their authenticator, a dedicated hardware security key, or a platform authenticator built into a device, meaning a phone's secure enclave or a laptop's TPM, generates a public-private key pair specifically for that one account, on that one service. The private key is generated inside the authenticator's own protected hardware. It never leaves that hardware. It is never transmitted anywhere, ever, under any circumstance, and in most implementations, it's not even extractable by the device's own operating system. The server only ever receives and stores the public key. There is, from this point forward, no secret anywhere in the system for a phishing page to intercept, because the one piece of information that would let someone impersonate the user was never sent over the network in the first place. Not once. not even during enrollment. Walk through the two ceremonies in order, because the word ceremony is doing real work here. These are precise, scripted exchanges, not loose conventions. Registration happens once. The server sends a random challenge and states its origin, the exact domain the user is enrolling with. The browser packages that origin alongside the challenge and hands both to the authenticator. The authenticator generates a new key pair bound to that specific origin, signs the public key, and an attestation statement, a manufacturer-signed claim about what kind of authenticator this actually is, and returns it. The server stores the public key against that origin permanently. Authentication happens every time the user logs in afterward, and it's a pure challenge response. The server sends a fresh, unpredictable challenge. The browser, not the website, the browser itself, running code no phishing page can override, takes that challenge, attaches the origin the page is actually being served from right now, and only then passes it to the authenticator. The authenticator checks that origin against the one it stored during registration. If they match, it signs the challenge with the private key that never left the hardware, and that signature goes back to the server, which verifies it against the public key on file. If they don't match, the authenticator refuses to sign anything at all. Not a warning the user can click past, a hard stop enforced by the browser's own implementation of the standard, before the user or the attacker's page ever gets a say in the matter. No password, no code, no shared secret crosses the wire at any point in either ceremony. What crosses the wire is a challenge and a signature over the wrong origin's challenge simply doesn't exist to be stolen. That origin check is the entire phishing resistance property, and it's worth stating plainly why it's structural rather than behavioral. Every phishing attack that has ever worked against a password or against a one-time code has worked by convincing a human that a fake page is a real one. A lookalike domain, a convincing logo, a plausible sense of urgency. WebAuthn doesn't try to make humans better at spotting that anymore, because it doesn't need the human to spot it. The check happens in the browser, cryptographically, against the exact origin string, and a lookalike domain, however perfect the visual copy, however close the misspelling, is a different origin, full stop. The authenticator will not produce a valid signature for it, no matter how convinced the human sitting in front of the screen is. This is the specific property traditional MFA never had. It moves the trust decision out of human judgment and into a mechanism a phishing page has no way to influence, because the page itself is never the thing being asked to verify where it is. The browser is. FIDO2 gets deployed today in two forms, and the difference is worth being deliberate about, rather than treating as interchangeable. A hardware security key is a dedicated physical device, a small USB or NFC token, whose only job is holding private keys and performing this ceremony. The key material lives on that device alone, never synced anywhere, never present on any general-purpose computer or phone at all. Losing it means re-enrolling a new key. It can't be reconstructed from a cloud backup because there is no cloud backup, which is precisely the property that makes it the higher assurance option. Passkeys are the current mainstream productization of the same underlying standard, and they trade a small amount of that assurance for a large amount of everyday convenience. A passkey's private key is generated the same way inside a platform authenticator, but it's then synced across a user's own devices through a platform or cloud credential manager, iCloud Keychain, Google Password Manager, Microsoft's equivalent. So a user who registers a passkey on their phone already has it on their laptop without re-enrolling. The origin binding property is identical either way. A passkey is exactly as phishing resistant as a hardware key during the ceremony itself. What differs is the attack surface around the credential's life cycle. A passkey's security now depends partly on the strength of the account protecting that cloud keychain, where a hardware keys does not. For most general staff, that trade-off is the right one. For the smallest set of highest risk accounts, it usually isn't. This is where the season closes a loop. It opened in the first episode. Kestrel's post-incident program didn't stop at segmenting the network or rebuilding its identity provider around OIDC. It went back to the exact access path the original attacker used and asked what would have actually stopped that specific ceremony from ever completing. The answer was FIDO2. Kestrel's rebuilt Contractor access program now mandates hardware security keys for its highest risk populations. Third-party contractors with any path to production systems and every administrative account, the same category of access the original attacker rode in on. And Passkeys for general staff, where the assurance versus convenience trade-off favors ease of enrollment at scale. Run the original incident back through this architecture, and the ceremony simply never gets that far. The attacker's phishing page could still be built, still be convincing, still be sent to the same contractor. What it cannot do is complete an authentication ceremony against Kestrel's real login origin, because the contractor's security key was registered against Kestrel's actual domain, and the phishing page is served from a different one. The browser checks that origin before the key ever signs anything, finds a mismatch, and the ceremony halts silently with nothing for the attacker to capture. No code to relay, no session to hijack, because there was never a shared secret in transit to begin with. The specific credential theft event that opened this entire season becomes, architecturally, not a risk that's merely reduced. It becomes a ceremony that cannot complete. It matters where FIDO2 actually sits in the stack we've already built this arc. It is not a replacement for the OIDC and SAML Federation covered 2 and 3 episodes back. It's the authenticator sitting behind that front end. The identity provider still issues the federated tokens, still runs the protocol handshake with every relying application. WebAuthn simply replaces what happens at the identity provider's own login screen, the step where the human actually proves who they are before any token gets minted at all. Get this layering wrong, and the whole investment collapses. The most common mistake is rolling out passkeys or security keys as an optional convenience while leaving password plus SMS enabled as a fallback for anyone who hasn't enrolled yet, which quietly preserves the exact phishable path this episode just spent 9 scenes eliminating. Available to any attacker willing to just ask the account to use the older option instead. A second recurring mistake is enrollment without a real recovery policy. A lost hardware key with no defined re-enrollment process becomes an outage, or worse, an incentive to keep that fallback path open indefinitely. The organizations that get real protection from this are the ones that treat FIDO2 as a mandated control for defined account tiers, with the fallback path closed, not as a feature users are invited to try. Phishing-resistant authentication solves the problem this season opened with: a routine account getting stolen by an ordinary phishing email. It deliberately does not solve a different, sharper problem. What happens to the accounts that hold the most power in the first place? The administrative and break glass access that has to exist for the system to be operable at all, and exactly how that access gets used, logged, and constrained when someone needs it. That's next episode: privileged access management and architecting the break glass path. If you're building systems that need to survive a breach, not just try to avoid one, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.